Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Today we're going to talk about the breakdown in communication and negotiation between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC in Gauteng in particular. So we heard a statement from Helen Zille explaining in a press conference what has been happening. And I'm going to be giving my thoughts on this. But first, let's actually go and listen to the statement that was made by Helen Zille.
Up till now, the ANC has been prepared to offer the DA a maximum of 3 out of 10 cabinet seats. That is 3 out of 10 cabinet seats, without telling us how many seats they intended to take for themselves and how many they intended to give to other parties. Now, obviously, that's a completely unsatisfactory situation. In the election, the ANC was only slightly bigger than the DA. In the election, the ANC got 34% of the vote, and the DA got 28% of the vote. So we were literally 6 percentage points behind the ANC. We are almost the same size. And so as we go into a government of provincial unity, we needed to take each other into confidence. And it wasn't a situation in which the ANC would constitute a government and invite us in on their terms. It was a situation in which we would respect each other's proportion of the electoral result and agree on the composition of an executive. That was the basis on which it was done. The ANC said, right, we want to give you 3 out of 10 cabinet seats. We wanted to know, well, what do you plan to do with the rest? Because unless we know how many you're planning to take for yourself and whether you're planning to give any to other parties, that is crucially important information for us, and it's information that we need. That's obviously essential to building trust and to ensuring that we get clarity on the composition of government. Now, today in the discussions, it was very useful because the ANC conceded that they had intended to allocate 3 cabinet seats to the DA and keep 7 plus the Premier, that is 8, for themselves. Now, clearly, that would be a violation of the proportionality clause. It would not in any way be proportional, not even wildly. It would not reflect the will of the voters, and it would not reflect inclusiveness. So it was completely out of kilter with Clause 16 of the Statement of Intent. And we said, sorry, 8-3 is not acceptable. Today they did agree to go down from 7 plus the Premier to 6 plus the Premier, which would be 7 out of 11, and give 1 seat to the IFP and keep us at 3. Now, we have no problem at all with the IFP coming in. In fact, the IFP was an initial signatory to the Statement of Intent, and we believe they should be there in good faith. So we have no problem with that at all. But it is still wildly out of proportion to give the ANC 6 plus 1, the DA 3, which is less than half of what the ANC has got, although we're almost the same size electorally, and the IFP 1. So we said that is not helpful. It does not meet Clause 16, and it is not appropriate, and we cannot agree to that. So, the ANC offered to reduce the 7 to 6, retain the DA at 3, and give the IFP or the PA, they said, 1. We welcome the IFP's possible inclusion, but point out that this is still far short of the requirements of Clause 16 of the National Statement of Intent. We, as the DA, are prepared to enter the government of provincial unity in Gauteng on the basis of a power-sharing partnership to reflect the will of the voters in Gauteng. But we are not prepared to be co-opted by the ANC on their terms alone, acting as if the ANC still has an overall majority in Gauteng, which it does not. We cannot agree to be taken hostage in a government of provincial unity in which only one party dictates the terms. As far as committee chairs in the Gauteng legislature are concerned, the proposal was that the DA would take 6 out of a total of 17, and we were prepared to accept this allocation despite a significant shortfall on the basis of the executive reflecting the letter and the spirit of the Declaration of Intent. Our door remains open to further negotiations when the ANC is genuinely committed to treating us as a party that is almost the same size as they are in Gauteng. We will again come to the table in an atmosphere of mutual respect and negotiate in good faith and seek to build trust between the parties. There is still work to do. We must work through the statement of intent to ensure that we have the same understanding of that statement and that we don't start arguing later about what various clauses mean. And we must reach an agreement for the genuine sharing of power so that we can properly serve the voters and act in the interests of the electorate and respect the way they voted.
Right. The first point that I want to make is that the Democratic Alliance is right on principle, but only if you look at this as a one-way deal. The whole coalition negotiation process is actually a three-way deal. What are the 3 levels of this deal? The deal is happening at national, it's happening at KZN level, and it's happening at Gauteng level. You can't look at it at one level only and then look for fairness or look for modalities only at one level. So it's true, they did sign an agreement, and in principle, whatever you sign in an agreement should be upheld. But that agreement doesn't apply the same at all levels. But at level 1, let's appreciate an agreement was entered into. However, let's also appreciate that the agreement that was entered into is not a legally binding agreement. This is a political contract. It's not a legally binding agreement, which is to say it's not enforceable in the same way that other legal agreements are enforceable, if you get what I'm trying to say. And I did a whole video going through the contract law and why this agreement does not have the elements of a contract, and in fact, why it's not a binding agreement, right? So that's number 1, meaning that it's a political agreement, which is to say the only way you react to a violation of a political agreement is through political actions and reactions. You then have to go back and figure out how are we going to deal with these guys if they don't honor the agreement. But the agreement in and of itself is not necessarily a legal agreement. So at a principle level, they are correct when they say, listen, these guys have got 34 point something, we've got 27 point something. Therefore, we should be close to each other in terms of how many seats we each get. That's a reasonable analysis if you're looking at only in the GP level. But this deal was not done just at a GP level. The negotiation, the discussions, the permutations, and the combinations do not just apply at a GP level, right? So what else then becomes relevant to consider? Let's then consider the argument that the IFP must get 1 seat in Gauteng. The IFP did not even get 1% in Gauteng. So at what level do they then deserve 1 seat, right? We have to really think about the IFP and the DA as a combo. This was a 2-for-1 special. The ANC got a 2-for-1 special. We saw the way that the donors were contributing to the Democratic Alliance and to the IFP, that donors and the DA and IFP have really got an understanding that they are a 2-for-1 special. It's a combo package. And because it's a combo package, we then have to think about what happens, right, in deliberation about the package. So let me explain what I mean by this. When it comes to KwaZulu-Natal, the combo, DA and IFP, got a fantastic deal. IFP got premiership. DA got finance. And that's very, very influential. Effectively, the Democratic Alliance combo has got control of two large economic hubs, KZN as well as Cape Town, where the DA controls proper, Western Cape rather.
We're working in terms of this agreement. And this states very carefully and clearly what is our right. It's not that we come as supplicants with a begging bowl. We are trying to implement an agreement signed by ourselves and by the ANC. And we take it seriously. We genuinely do. Because you can't establish governments in good faith unless these agreements are taken seriously. It's like having an anti-nuptial contract and everybody just ignores it afterwards. You can't do that. I've been in many governments before. I've taken over many governments from the ANC, actually. And I now run the DA's governance unit, which manages a lot of coalitions across the country. And if these documents aren't worth the paper they are written on, then the government that emerges from it is on rocky ground and has no foundation. So we expect the agreement to be implemented, which I think is absolutely rational and fair. And not only is it rational and fair, it is a prerequisite for the government to work. So we are saying clause 16, proportionality, reflects the outcome of the election, and inclusivity is important for us. It's not a question of how much will the ANC give us and what are we demanding. We do it on the basis of a document. And we expect them to be fair with us and help us build trust. Not say, oh, we'll decide on the other parties and we'll negotiate with the other parties. Meanwhile, today they admitted they wanted all of the 7+1 for themselves. That's not conducive to building trust, because we would have ended up with 3 in a cabinet of 11, and they would have had the rest of the 8, having fobbed us off, saying all the time, we're bringing in the smaller parties, but never taking us into their confidence as to which ones they were. So we're saying we're at the table. If you're not prepared to live by these documents, we will go into opposition. And we don't mind being in opposition. It is our comfort zone. And it's not a threat. It's just a fact. And facts aren't threats. No threats here, just a fact that we will go into opposition if the agreements that we signed are not honored, which is a totally rational position to take. And we know that the next election is 2 years away from now, which is round the corner, and we'll see what happens there.
So when you then put it in that perspective, the second point then I think comes into play, which is that the Democratic Alliance must compromise. The ANC has a power concern here. If the DA as a combo package with IFP has got economic control of KZN and they've got economic control of the Western Cape, if they gain economic control of GP as well, or even significant economic control of GP, then it means that in the coalition negotiations, the ANC will have lost economic control of the 3 provinces, which are the economic hubs, right? So this is why I think that the Democratic Alliance must compromise, because they got more than they deserved as a combo in KwaZulu-Natal. Think about this. The Democratic Alliance had 13% in KwaZulu-Natal, IFP had 18%. Between the two of them, they are just over 31%. With 31%, they got the premiership, they got finance, public works, and several others. So when you think about that, it effectively means that the ANC gave up KwaZulu-Natal to this combo package. So because of that, the DA has to take a back seat when it comes to Gauteng province. That is the mathematics. There's another thing that needs to be discussed as well, which I'll discuss later. But if we accept that the IFP and the DA are a combo package, it shows that the principal point that, well, we got almost the same thing and therefore we need to have an equal share is not entirely correct. And also the other argument that, hey, listen, you are not leading this process, we are co-leading the process, is not genuine, because the process was led by the ANC at all levels because the ANC had these conversations with the DA and initiated these coalition conversations. If the DA had said, we are starting a coalition process, come and talk to us, it wouldn't have happened. So in as much as they are a large partner, they are not the leading partner. And as a result of that, I think that there's almost an attempt by the DA to over-assert how much of a say they're supposed to have in this particular process. But that's my second point. The third thing I want to discuss in this conversation is the idea of leverage. What is the leverage that the Democratic Alliance has? I think that they have less leverage now than they had before. So right now, today, we saw cabinet ministers swearing their oaths, etc. We've already seen that the KZN leadership is beginning to work, right? Their MECs in the province. We've also seen, people at a national level coming into parliament, into different positions, right? That's deputy speaker, you name it. So at this particular point, almost everything is signed. KZN is done, National is done. You've got very little leverage at this point as the Democratic Alliance. The threat that they are making, right, and they're saying it's not a threat, it's a promise or it's a fact, whatever the case is. Whenever someone says this is not a threat, it's a promise or it's a fact, that's a threat. That's a threat. Whenever someone says that, you know that's a threat. But in any event, think about this. John is already Minister of Agriculture. Dean is Minister. Leon Schreiber is Minister of Home Affairs. All of these people, Dion is in Fisheries. Siviwe is in Basic Education. They're not going to walk away from that. So that's already gone. You've lost that leverage. Also, they're not going to walk away from KZN. They've already said it. You've lost that leverage. The only leverage that you've got is that you're not going to reconstitute Tshwane and Ekhuruleni as metros. Yes, but how much are they really going to care about that at this particular point? I think that saying to the ANC that you are willing to go into opposition is a demonstration that you've got less leverage in this particular case than you had before. And even threatening that, listen, 2026 is coming, we'll see how voters vote. Voters don't support both of you guys in the way that you think they do, right? If we are honest, both of these parties are in decline. And the dynamics may have shifted such that both of them will take a big hiding in the next election. So Panyaza and ANC in Gauteng are not going to be afraid of 2026 in the way that the Democratic Alliance thinks. Whatever happens, whatever shortcomings happen in this particular election, people may blame both of these parties. This deal has got many problems with the base of the ANC in the first instance, right? Many people within the ANC are not happy to be in alliance with the DA. So the idea that, somehow both of these parties will be better or in a stronger position in 2026 is not proven. People who are playing for power now are playing for power now. So I don't think that there's as much leverage as the DA thinks that they have in this particular situation. There's something else that I want to talk about, and this is this demonization that the Democratic Alliance has done of the MK and of the EFF.
So we aren't, I'll be quite honest, we could threaten to bring KwaZulu-Natal down if they don't agree to the document's terms in Gauteng, but we're not going to do that. We're not irresponsible people. We don't want to hand KwaZulu-Natal to MK and the EFF. It would be a total disaster for that province. So we're not about to do that. There are other levers that we're going to use. Obviously there are. But we're not going to say the people of KwaZulu-Natal can be thrown to the dogs. Not at all. And we are also going to say that unless we have a respectful settlement in Gauteng, we're not going to sit and do negotiations around the reconstitution of all the metros like Ekhuruleni and like Johannesburg and like Mogale City, because we have to build a basis of trust with the ANC, and they must tell us the truth, because we have to be partners in a government of provincial unity. If you don't agree with them, you are by definition arrogant, because no one's allowed to disagree. When we request and require that signed agreements be respected and implemented, then suddenly we're arrogant. Asking people to respect documents that have been signed and agreed to through a process is not arrogant. It's the way the world functions in a predictable and orderly way. And all we are asking for is agreements to be respected and to be treated as partners and not as supplicants. We understand that the ANC is slightly bigger than we are in Gauteng. It's the third biggest party in KwaZulu-Natal, but it is the biggest party still in Gauteng. And we respect that, and we will recognize that in implementing the agreement. But equally, we expect to be recognized as the second biggest party, not far behind. And we need a respectful interchange. We don't go to the media and say things about the ANC as, for example, they said about us last night. We come in a respectful tone, referring to the documentation that's been signed, referring to the expectations that are legitimate of our voters, and looking forward to ensure that when we're in government, we are not just in office, but that we have some power in proportion to the votes we bring to the government of provincial unity. That is not arrogant. That is decent and respectful, and in fact expected by the negotiated settlement.
The description of MK and EFF as dogs is one that is not morally acceptable, is one that should not be politically acceptable. Why? That was demeaning language of the parties and demeaning language to the voters, right? This inherent assumption that if anything is led or governed by EFF or MK, it's going to the dogs. That's just an assertion on the part of the DA as a political rival to these entities. We have no way of knowing for certain what quality of leadership will be presented by the MK and EFF. And to simply assume and assert that it's going to be something that is catastrophic or that they are tsotsis or anything to that effect is one that is not necessarily substantiated. In fact, when Zuma was the president of South Africa, the economy was performing better than the Ramaphosa economy. And that's a mathematical fact, right? So there's something that I want to talk about: dehumanizing language. Dehumanizing language in politics allows for abuse of the people who have been demonized. It allows for ostracization of the people who have been demonized, and is often a precursor to a lot of funny business. In Rwanda, before the genocide that happened there was a description of the Tutsis as cockroaches. And oftentimes, as a precursor to atrocities, dehumanizing language is used. I'm not saying that there's going to be an atrocity committed in South Africa, but I do think that there are certain attitudes and abuses of power that have been normalized because certain people have been villainized and dehumanized. And I think it's a problem. Deeper than that, political tolerance is important and must not be undermined. Democracy is based on 3 pillars: freedom, equality, and dignity. That is what the principle of democracy is based on. That people are free to exercise their expression, their political rights, their religion, and to associate with whomsoever they want. That all in the democracy are equal. All are equal, right? And all have inherent dignity as human beings, meaning that we shouldn't be calling people and voters dogs or anything like that, or deplorables, which is what Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters, right? Democracy then works from the fact that you accept that when people exercise their dignity, their freedom, their equality, they are going to make choices that are different from yours. They're going to have beliefs that are different from yours. And you may fundamentally disagree with them, but you have to accept and tolerate those diverging expressions. because you accept that democracy is a superior system of government. When you start to demean and dehumanize people who have different understandings or appreciations or articulations of the same democratic framework as you, that becomes a problem. By the way, there's a difference between people who say that they want to amend the Constitution and people who say they want to abolish the Constitution. So this idea that the Constitution anybody who says let's change the Constitution is attacking the Constitution, not wrong, is not correct. In America, they have amendments, right? First Amendment, Second Amendment, 14th Amendment. First Amendment is free speech. Second Amendment is guns. 14th Amendment, I can't remember what it is, but it's a very big amendment. Point I'm making is that those amendments were made after the Constitution was drafted. Amending a constitution is part of constitutionalism. This conversation by the DA that no, we are the ones defending the Constitution and these other ones, we don't want them because they want to attack the Constitution, is a mischaracterization of some of the arguments that have been made by these political parties, even the MK and the EFF. And I asked Jacob Zuma directly. I said, hey, what are you guys saying about parliamentary sovereignty? Why do you want to change the constitutional structure in such a way that it will actually go back to a problematic system of constitutionalism? Because what we saw with the Harris cases is that when Parliament found that they didn't like what courts were saying, they would change things. And that's why we ended up with a system where the Constitution is supreme. I asked them. But this idea that is being articulated by the DA, that no, we are the only ones defending the Constitution, I think that's something that is also a slippery slope and we should be cautious about. Respecting voters. Helen Zille spoke a lot about, no, we must respect voters, we must respect voters, we must respect the will of voters. That's not only about respecting DA voters. She's talking about respecting the will of the people. That's not only about respecting DA voters and ANC voters. There are many people, 2.3 million, voted for MK. Those are real human beings. 1.5 million voted for EFF. Those are real human beings. In total, that's 3.8 million people, more than the people who voted for the DA. DA voters deserve respect. Their ideological frameworks, some of them I may disagree with, right? Some of them I do agree with, right? I do agree with certain principles of liberalism with a small L. I don't agree with the privatization of public goods, but I do agree with the market economy. I'm not a socialist. EFF are socialist. I'm not a socialist. I believe in conscious capitalism, which is to say that some forms of capitalism I think need to be curtailed, and some forms are very good and should be encouraged because they grow the economy, they're inclusive. But the DA doesn't seem to extend that same respect to others. And I think it's a problem when the DA uses language as, no, if we leave this, it will go to the dogs. Kimang dogs. Who are the dogs? Kimang the dogs. Helen says, no, we're not arrogant, we're not arrogant. This is a real issue, though. It's a sign of arrogance to think that you guys, you're holy and other people are not holy. And by the way, as I'm talking about this holy thing, the DA loves to act like they are holier than thou. But let's consider this. Solim Simanga had a scandal when he was the mayor of Tshwane. He had a scandal. Do you remember? Then he had another scandal where all of a sudden this guy is bleeding all over here. He's crying. And when the guy who had given him some fisticuffs, you remember, because there was a Mike Tyson guy there who gave him a few knuckles. And that guy said that Solim Simanga owed him R1 million. R1 million. So this guy is not corrupt. He's clean here, Soli. He's clean because he wears a blue t-shirt. Remember all of the scandals with the security guards who were given, bouncers given certain jobs. Come on. Right now, as things stand, Tshwane does not have a clean audit. They haven't been able to balance the books. So this idea that the DA is the only one that can balance the books, is that true everywhere where the DA governs? No, it's not true. Factually, Auditor General report showed Tshwane has not had a balanced book ever since the DA started running that place. Right? Then there were qualification scandals in the DA. People who had claimed or created impressions that they had qualifications that they never had. Busy walking around talking about, no, this particular thing. Let me give you concrete examples. When they wanted to get rid of Patricia de Lille, they had this report which was called the Steenhuisen report. They were like, and Natasha Mazzoni was speaking on the Steenhuisen report. That thing was taken to the courts and they lost. In a full bench. They lost. And then they started disagreeing with the judges, only to find out later that Natasha Mazzoni doesn't have a law degree, John Steenhuisen doesn't have a law degree, and they were relying on the Steenhuisen report. Is that ethical? Helen Zille gave her son tablets when she was the premier of the Western Cape so that he could run his business there. And then when the public protector found that there was a conflict of interest, she said, no, it wasn't a conflict of interest, it was a convergence of interest. So when you do it, it's convergence of interest. When Zuma does it, it's not convergence of interest. It's Zuma must fall. It's Babaga Tutuzad. Come on, guys. You're not holier than thou. There were also questions around how John Steenhuisen funded his internal campaign when he was campaigning for leader. There was a guy in the DA who had... there's so much. There's so much. There have been corrupt people in the Democratic Alliance who've actually been arrested. You are not holier than thou as a whole. Of course, there are many good people in the DA. We have to acknowledge that. But why do you guys walk around saying that other people are dogs? And you guys, what are you? Stallions. You're Bomekan. Huh? You guys are Megan the Stallion and then everyone else is dogs. That's not right. That's not right. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. Please subscribe. Let YouTube know that you appreciate this content. Like, comment, subscribe, all of the things. That's all the time we have for today. What do you think, though? Do you think that this is going to survive, this coalition, considering all of these dynamics that are beginning to play? Will it make it to 2029? What do you think? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.